Welcome to another episode of Raising OKC Kids, Conversations with Metro Family in Oklahoma City. I'm Kirsten Holder, and today we're talking about how to talk to kids about homelessness with Meghan Mueller and Carrie Sauer from the Homeless Alliance. Welcome, Meghan and Carrie.
Thank you. Hi.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, and I love having you guys. I'm so excited to jump into this topic, but I'd love to start with a couple introductions to give our listeners some background on you both. Meghan is the Associate Executive Director at the Homeless Alliance and a licensed social worker. She is one of only 4 social workers in the state of Oklahoma to hold an advanced license in social work administration. Meghan is a fellow for the Interdisciplinary Leadership, Education, and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities Program and has professional and research experience with youth, poverty, homelessness, and people with disabilities. She believes that housing is a basic human right and that all of our neighbors deserve the dignity of a place to call home. Meghan lives in OKC with her husband Andy and daughters Emma, who is 4, and Nora, who is 9 months. They enjoy hanging out outside together with their dog Odin. Carrie joined the Homeless Alliance as the Director of Development in July 2021. She holds a master's degree in nonprofit leadership from Oklahoma City University and has 11 years of experience in fundraising and donor stewardship. Carrie enjoys living in OKC urban core with her husband Jesse and her kids Charlotte, who is 6, and Sheridan, who is 5. And so, saying all of that, I'd love to hear from both of you about why you felt called to support the unhoused members of our community. Meghan, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, so I think, homelessness kind of found me. I never sought out to work in homelessness forever, but now I just can't imagine doing anything else. So I've been doing this work for about 10 years. And I truly believe that everyone deserves the dignity of a place to call home. And I love that part of my job is helping people, realize that goal. I also think that people who are experiencing homelessness are some of the most creative and resilient people in our community. And so I love that I get to work with those folks firsthand, and really experience a part of our city that a lot of people are unfamiliar with.
Well said. Carrie, how about you?
Well, for me, as I've gotten older, I've realized how really fortunate I am to have loving parents who have the resources to provide a safety net for me and my sisters. And if one of us were to experience a health crisis, physical or mental, or loss of a job or loss of a spouse, we've got people who would rally to help us. And I've realized that not everyone has that. And a lot of our neighbors, unfortunately, are just one crisis or one loss away from not having a home. And the fact that so many of our neighbors live that precariously is really upsetting to me. So in my role at the Homeless Alliance, I love that I get to tell those stories of those creative and resilient people, and what they've experienced. And I get to connect this need that we have in our community with people and companies and foundations that want to help. So that's really feels like a privilege to me to make those connections.
I love hearing people's inspiration behind their jobs, and I couldn't agree more. You two are doing such important work, and I'm so thankful to be able to talk with both of you today. So I read that the Homeless Alliance was started by a group of passionate volunteers rather than a franchise of a larger nationwide organization, which is just amazing in itself. Those volunteers identified gaps in the system and then worked with communities to fill those gaps in order to care for these individuals experiencing homelessness. Can you elaborate on what some of those gaps are that were identified and how the Homeless Alliance works to fill them? And Carrie, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. One of the things that really excites me about the Homeless Alliance, which is kind of nerdy, is that we established the first shared database for homeless services in Oklahoma City. Prior to the Homeless Alliance, different agencies, there's over 100 agencies in Oklahoma City, faith-based or government or nonprofit, that are addressing it in some way. And they all had their own systems for recording information. If someone went to get assistance from one organization, they would have to tell their story again and again and again for every organization that they visited and worked with. And that can be really re-traumatizing for people. And so the Homeless Alliance established a homeless management information system. So a database of all of the folks and the services that are provided so that we can look at community outcomes and see where we need to do better, and serve people as best as we can. So I'm really into that side of things.
Megan, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so in talking about just like the founding of the Homeless Alliance and how we started, one of the first things we identified as a need in the community was a day shelter. So before we opened our day shelter, there was no place for folks to go during the day to get out of the elements. And at the time, we were the only city of our size that didn't have that resource for folks in the community. So that was, really early on identifying that need and filling the gap. Another area that I think we've really been able to, find those gaps and then fill and innovate is really just in that interagency collaboration. So, Carrie touched on the technology piece, but years ago, before the Homeless Alliance existed, we had all these providers who were doing good work, but who didn't know each other. And so it sounds so simple and so basic, but I think one of the more innovative things that we've done as an agency is getting those folks around the same table and saying, like, this is what we're doing. What are you doing? And how can we work together? The resources are so limited. And so the more we can collaborate and work together, the more efficient and effective our system as a whole is.
I love hearing that because surely everyone who works in this industry is passionate about people.
Exactly.
Yes, and so when you are sharing resources, Carrie, that's a great point about sometimes reopening the stories of trauma, really trying to help the people you're trying to help and get all the admin work to the side, and that really speaks to the true heart of the organization. I love hearing that. One of the missions and goals of the Homeless Alliance is to quote unquote end homelessness in OKC, which I feel like is a very bold statement. We all know the reasons for homeless members of our community are so complex, they're complicated, they're varying, and they can be really overwhelming. What are some of the tools and programs that you offer that you feel have been most successful in bringing you closer to this big goal? And Megan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you touched on the fact that homelessness is complex, because you are exactly right. It is so complex. There are so many factors playing into each, individual person's experience. And so there's no one size fits all solution that's going to end homelessness for every single person in our community. But there are some things that we know, universally everyone needs, right? So the thing that actually ends homelessness is housing. And so we take a housing first approach to homeless services, which really means that when we're engaging someone and talking to them about ending their homelessness, we start with the housing piece, and then we build a wraparound system of care to help them meet their additional goals once they've achieved some stability, once they know that they have a safe place to call home. And so that is just a really critical piece to all of our work, is the idea that housing comes first and comes without preconditions. Beyond that, critical to our work is the idea that people need support. And so for a lot of folks, who've lived outside for a long time, that's their community. They've adapted skills to survive outdoors. I personally don't think I'm resilient enough to survive outside. So folks who are doing that day in and day out, they have this unique set of skills that doesn't always translate into a housing placement, particularly if, again, their community, their friends are maybe still living outdoors. And so another really important piece in this work is providing long-term supports to people that are highly individualized, and follow people from homelessness through that transition into housing. And again, help them think about what life could look like in housing and help them dream and set goals, and then help them take tangible steps towards meeting those goals.
Carrie, do you have anything to add?
So at the Homeless Alliance, we're really trying to end homelessness one person at a time with that individualized attention to what their specific needs are. But we're also collaborating with community partners and with city government to look at ways that we can address the causes of homelessness and how we can prevent more people from falling into that gap. And so the Homeless Alliance is really active in a lot of different community groups and meeting with elected officials and city management so that we can develop the best solutions to these problems.
I'm so glad you are. And it's making me really think, Meghan's comment about starting with the home. Those of us listening, probably most of us have kids. And so sometimes I think you do take for granted, the house you live in and how big of a piece of your family and of your family's security and foundation that really can represent as we're growing up. And it is, everything in parenting puts everything in perspective. I feel like as I get older, you're seeing things through your kids' eyes and really trying to reevaluate what the value of certain things are, and the value of a home can be that foundation for someone's life. So I love hearing those things.
I love that you bring that up too, because whenever I'm talking to, groups of folks about this idea, and, I always will frame the question, like, how do we end homelessness? How do we do that? And a lot of times, people throw out lots of really good ideas, right? Like access to healthcare, access to substance use treatment, all these things are true. But if you asked a group of kiddos, if you asked a group of kindergartners, like, what would it take to end someone's homelessness? They would say homes, right? It's such a simple idea. And I love that, we're talking about how to talk to kiddos about homelessness. And, really, it's that simple, right? Like homes end homelessness.
They get it.
They
Right?
get it, exactly.
Yeah.
They're putting the puzzle pieces together already. Well, it's Bob's hierarchy of needs. You need to have that secure establishment to build everything else on.
It's really hard to work on those higher level goals when you're just in crisis mode and you don't even know where you're going to use the bathroom next or where your next meal will come from. It's unrealistic to expect someone to be able to I don't always have my life in order. It's unrealistic to expect someone to have all their ducks in a row when they're in crisis mode all the time.
Absolutely. I'd love to call attention to the snapshot of demographics for the unhoused in our community as captured by the Point in Time study that you all participated in. It's a study that's conducted annually. And Carrie kind of mentioned the technology behind recording some of the people in our community. But I thought it was a very interesting snapshot and might be surprising to some people. It can be found on the Homeless Alliance OKC's website, but I'll just run through it very quickly. 10% of the population are veterans. I don't think that was very surprising. 16% are members of families with children, which of course just strike through the heart right there. 36 are female, 63 are male, 1% are transgender, non-conforming, 51% are white, 27 are Black, and 10% are Native American. 20% are youth age 24 or younger. Again, that is just heartbreaking to hear. 28% of the population reports mental illness. 35%, which is a substantial number, are considered chronically homeless. 50% were staying in a shelter. 13% in transitional housing, or 35%, again, a big number, just totally unsheltered. So those stats really, I feel like when I was reading through, put in perspective who we're talking about and what we need to be talking about. They're staggering and at the same time very mystifying to me. Are there common threads that you've noticed during your tenure at the Homeless Alliance? Any commonalities that can be used to understand how to solve homelessness? We talked about just providing homes, but is there any, as you look at the demographics, common threads that you're seeing between these groups of people and their specific needs? And Carrie, we'll start with you.
Actually, I'm gonna let Megan handle this one. She's been working with this data a bit longer than I have and understands it really well.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, so you're exactly right. That data is staggering. And a lot of it is really sad. I think that there are some positive takeaways from the data. So one of the things that gives me the most hope from our point in time count, we all know, especially those of us who live, in and around downtown OKC, there's been a ton of growth, right? So our city has experienced just tremendous growth over the last several years, which is really exciting. But a lot of times, like, the flip side of that coin is like, what is that doing for folks who maybe were right on the line, or who are in those precarious situations that Carrie was mentioning earlier? But I think what we see in trend data from the point in time count is that we're not seeing the same level of growth in our homeless population that we're seeing in general public. Thank goodness, right? And I think that, really that is just an example of how exceptional our group of providers is here and how well we're working together. The need is great. There are never enough resources. But I think the fact that our numbers have remained somewhat steady despite population growth is indicative that we're doing a pretty good job with what we have. We can always do better. But that is a trend that we see in point in time that gives me hope when, again, some of those other numbers you rattled off can just be kind of overwhelming and staggering.
It's nice perspective to hear that there's hope in those numbers. So thank you for outlining that. The Homeless Alliance also has a street outreach team, which goes into the community to find people and connect them with services, and operates 3 low barrier employment programs, including Curbside Chronicle, which, again, I'm sure if anybody lives in the OKC metro area has seen people with the green vest selling the magazines. Curbside Flowers, which the Museum of Art has done exhibits around these flower arrangements. They're just outstanding. And then Sasquatch Shaved Ice. I'd love you to tell me a bit about how these businesses got started, where the inspiration come from, how they've been received by the community, how are they similar to other programs you've seen, and then also talk about what low barrier is for these employment programs and why it's important. Carrie, would you like to start us out here?
Sure. So our social enterprises, those are social enterprises of, it looks like a business, but any profits goes back into a nonprofit mission, which in our case is providing supportive employment. So our social enterprises were all founded by a husband and wife team, Whitley O'Connor and Rania Fergatson. They were actually recognized by the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits last year for their great work. They had seen similar initiatives in other communities and decided to try and make it work here. So this summer, we will celebrate 10 years of the Curbside Chronicle magazine. That's our oldest social enterprise, and we're going to publish our 100th issue this summer. So we're pretty excited about that. It is the most low barrier employment program you can imagine, in that you do not need to have an ID. You don't need to know what your social security number is. Anyone can come in and learn how to sell curbside and start making an income right away. We do orientations twice a week, and people can just come and learn about the program and what it's like. And then we get them started with a backpack and 15 free magazines. After that, they purchase the magazines, and then they keep what they earn. So it is really, some people kind of wonder about that side of things. Yes, our vendors set their own hours. They choose when and where they work. They keep what they earn, and we encourage them to invest back part into their housing goals and personal goals, and partly back into purchasing more magazines. That program has been super successful, but we realized that there was a gap between this very low barrier employment, where you're kind of an independent contractor, to more traditional employment in the community. And we wanted to find a way to build some of those skills to fill that gap and help people transition. And so that's kind of how Curbside Flowers was born. We started by selling bouquets during holidays, and then a few years ago opened up a physical location at Northwest 5th and Classen. The staff who work there are florists. They all have floral design certification. They're all former magazine vendors. And so they apply for the opportunity to get that more traditional work experience, to work on a team, to work a shift, to learn how to follow complex instructions for creating our beautiful designs. They work special events. They are very, very busy right now, getting ready for Valentine's Day, and during Mother's Day is coming up, and that'll be another really big time for them. So again, it is providing employment opportunity that is understanding, supportive, flexible, really helping them to build up their confidence and their skills so that they can be successful in traditional workplace. Sasquatch Shaved Ice is a little special because it's a youth employment program. So in most cases, the youth have not yet experienced homelessness, but they are at risk. And so they're referred to us by partner agencies for kids who need that special understanding employment opportunity that's really going to coach them on things like money management. That'll really help them get off to a good start. And this year we will be launching an additional social enterprise, Curbside Apparel, which is a screen printing business. So definitely follow us on social media so that you can get all the information when that launches. We just see a real need for this in our community. It's been really well received. People are really excited to support us. We're doing so many weddings and special events these days with curbside flowers. And it really means a lot to us when our magazine vendors say that they have had a really good conversation with someone who they sold a magazine to. That makes us feel good. That's good for our whole community, building those relationships, getting to know each other, kind of crossing boundaries, breaking down barriers. That's what we're all about.
Mm. Oh my gosh, so many things I want to pull out from that. I love
Sorry,
that.
I don't even think I answered all your questions.
You did, yes. I threw a lot at you, but you answered them beautifully.
Yeah.
And I love hearing that Curbside Flowers has been involved in events even and growing in that way. I think the thing that I love seeing from the magazines, Sasquatch Ice, the flowers, is kind of what you mentioned, breaking down barriers, seeing unhoused people as humans, just like you, being able to start conversations about something you now have in common with somebody that you might not think you have anything in common with. You can talk about the article they wrote. I've met several curbside vendors that said, look on page 12, I wrote that whole, and then I see them again the next day and I get to comment on that because I now have something in common with them. And I think that is just a beautiful aspect of all three of those businesses.
I think so too. I love it. It's important to have those opportunities to get to know each other.
On top of sneaking in some life skills. That's very nice. Megan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Carrie summed it up really well. And then I love what you pulled out, because that is absolutely my favorite part of those programs too, is that it's facilitating those interactions between community members that might not organically happen otherwise. And it's just helping us all grow in our understanding of each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that understanding and empathy building, I would argue, is just as important of a foundation to lead from. So good job to you both. So now that we have a little background on what the Homeless Alliance does, what they offer, I'd love to get into some scripting help with my kids. It's a parent's job to help explain the world's work kids, of course, which is often quite complicated for those of us with kids whose age does not allow them to see margin, to see the gray area, and to truly understand, yes or no and in between. Oklahoma City's unsheltered population is 35%, meaning the chances are that if you live near really any major highway in the OKC metro, you've seen people on the side of the street asking for money. My son is 4. He's recently learned to read, and those cardboard signs with their big bold lettering are perfect practice grounds, but also complicated questions and conversation topics come up as he's reading some of these signs. So I'd love to get some professional advice and help, and I know our listeners do too, on how we answer the big question. Why doesn't that person have a home? Why is that person asking for money? And on and on. So Megan, let's go ahead and start with you because I know you've got a 4-year-old at home as well.
I do. I do have a 4-year-old. No one prepared me for the onslaught of questions that a 4-year-old can come up with. So I relate to this deeply. Yeah, I mean, so you're exactly right. It's something that we see in our community, and it's something that kids are naturally curious about. Um, Something that I always try to do when my daughter, brings these questions to me. I want to build empathy. You just touched on that a minute ago, but I think it is so critical. And if we can do that empathy building when our kids are young, I think, hopefully we're going to be raising more understanding adults. And so laying that groundwork early and often, I think, is really important. It's really important to me, as I'm having those conversations with my daughter, that she understand that people might be living outside for lots of different reasons, and that person is not scary or bad. It's really important to me to help her, understand that just because someone is experiencing homelessness doesn't mean that they did something wrong.
Mm.
Typically, I would respond to a question by saying, yeah, you're right. That is a person who's sleeping outside. That makes me feel really sad. How does that make you feel? So, asking her the question, getting her thinking about how do we feel when we see someone who may be experiencing homelessness, and sharing how I feel about that, I think, is an important step in helping her process those things. I also, want to help her think about what home means to her, right? Like complex societal issues, that can be a hard thing for a child to process, but home has some really tangible things that even young children can cling to, right? So what is home? Home is a place where the people you love live. It's a place where you keep all your stuff. Your clothes and your toys are in your home. It's a place where you get your food. It's a place where you take your baths. It's a place where ultimately you go to sleep. And so, my young child knows all those things about home. And so when we can make that connection to home and then help her think about, now, what would it look like if that didn't exist? Like, this person has that big shopping cart because they don't have a place to store their toys and their clothes. They're storing all of their belongings right here. And I think helping children think through, the meaning of home can help them then make those connections when they see someone who maybe doesn't have a home. I think for older children, we can start to kind of expand on those ideas of some of those more complex systems. Again, really keeping in mind that homelessness is not just the result of individual circumstance. It's the complex interplay of individual circumstance and much larger systems issues. And so I think as kiddos get older, those are things that we can start to dig into. But again, the idea that this is not a problem with a person, I think, is a really important concept to try to address regardless of the age.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. Carrie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think to facilitate those conversations that Megan mentioned with older children, the Curbside Chronicle is a great resource to read articles with your older kids and talk about what they mean. What this month's issue looks at trauma and the impacts it has on a person. And I think that would be appropriate to discuss with the teen, and that you might have classmates that have experienced trauma in their lives and you don't know that. And this is how it might be impacting them. We also do issues for kids sometimes. And so look out for the kids issue to share with younger children. It has really age appropriate messaging that you can share. The last one that we did was over a year ago, but I do have many copies. If anyone reaches out to me, I can hook them up. I would also say that for my kids, so the route that we take to school every day, we see tents and sleeping bags every day. And I hate that it's normal for them. It shouldn't be normal for them. But they do have questions. And I found that is what is reassuring for them is to know that there's people who are helping. It's like Fred Rogers' mother said, look for the helpers. And in times of crisis, that's definitely true. We talk about how there are people who agree that it's sad and it's not fair, and they are working to help. And that is reassuring for them, and finding ways to involve them in that help is important to me. So I let them know all the ways that my husband and I, our family donates time and items and money to help others in need. So, and look for ways to kind of include them in that. So that might mean helping me gather up items for donation or shopping for them when we're out together, and talking about how we have these things and I want others to have these things as well. I do want to mention the importance of giving nonprofits what they need and not what you think they need. Because one great example for the Homeless Alliance is people assume that we need socks. And actually we have a partnership with Bombas that provides thousands of pairs of socks every year. What we really need the most, honestly, is underwear. That's what we go through the fastest and we need constantly. So don't hesitate to do a little research before you start kind of a donation drive with your kids, to make sure that you are matching what you're gathering with the right organization, that it's an organization that needs what you are collecting.
So to all of our listeners who are listening in the car, on their way running errands, picking kids up, go stop and get some underwear.
Yes, please.
And those supply lists can be found on the websites of each of the organizations, those
Yes.
space lists. But no, I'd love to just circle back, the empathy building, really putting yourself in someone else's shoes, looking for the helpers, those encouragement, and questions that kind of open up more questions are sometimes scary for us as parents to even get into, because we feel like we need to provide a concrete end or solution, or this is the reason. And like we talked about in the podcast so far, there isn't one reason. But I love offering those scripted answers because they're non-judgment based. There's no, anger, animosity, because kids pick up on that behind your voice when you're talking about some things like this. And so I think just really focusing on how to be a community helper and how to build empathy in your own home. Those are really great things for even us as parents to focus on too. That's what's needed, not judgment or anger or resentment or anything like that. Many of the listeners are community helpers. They want to raise world changers. So I know this is resonating with so many of our listeners. We'd love to help individuals experiencing homelessness. How would you best recommend helping when we see them? Maybe it's not somebody in a curbside green apron, but that needs our help. What's the best way to address that street corner situation? And how do we teach or talk to our kids about what we do in those situations and what we want to leave them with?
Yeah, so something that, again, I tell everyone, regardless of age, is be kind, which again is so simple and so basic. But so many people who are experiencing homelessness are used to being ignored. They're used to being in a public space and having people right by them and pretend that they're not there, because that can be uncomfortable, right? And so I think that just actually acknowledging, that is a human being can be super powerful. We've talked a lot about just like humanizing this issue. And so really, I think as parents, but just as people, that's one of the best things that we can do, is not ignore people that we see who are maybe on the corner, or who we think may be experiencing homelessness. So my husband teases me a lot because I wave at all strangers. But I do that because I think it's really important. Carrie touched on trauma a little bit. We have this much of a person's story at any given moment, right? And there's just such a broader picture, and there's so much more going on than any of us can ever know. And so I think that just a friendly hello and a wave, as cheesy as it sounds, really has the power to turn someone's day around, and to make someone feel like a person, when maybe they haven't felt that in some time. And so I think, that is something that we can do. That is something that we can model for our children. And that is something that kiddos can do, whether they're in the car or on a walk, they can smile and wave. And it takes no effort and no money, but it really could make someone's day. And then I think, again, that's an opportunity to facilitate a conversation. If it's why did you wave at that person? Well, that person is our neighbor, that person is a member of our community. And I just wanted to tell them hello and I hope they have a good day, So I think it's just an opportunity to build that bridge. And again, just remind our kids that people are people, no matter where they live.
Well said. Carrie, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure, I love that. One thing that I personally like to do is keep a few bus passes handy. Embark has a sale for half price bus passes every July and December, and I like to stock up and have a few with me so that I can help someone, provide them with transportation to shelter. That really resonates with me, and it makes sense to my kids. They're like, what did you give him? I gave him a bus ticket so that he could go someplace to get help. And so to me, it is something tangible and really useful that I can do, but makes sense to my kids as well. And I explain to them what I'm doing.
And sometimes we as parents need that tangible thing too. So I appreciate that pro tip.
And of course, I always have a couple bucks in my car for Curbside Chronicle. And then I bring it back to the office and I put it back.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need this, but I still love to support our vendors out in the community. I love to show them love anytime I'll do a loop around the block when I need to catch someone.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you so much for you both sharing that. So if you remember us mentioning earlier, 20% of the homeless population in our community are youth age 24 or younger. I'd love to ask both of you, how should we talk to or train our kids to recognize if a peer at school might be unhoused, might be just couch homeless or worse? And then what should they do if they suspect their friend or someone in their school might need help but doesn't know how to ask?
Yeah. Again, I think starting with kindness is a really basic step, but just having relationships with folks and being a good friend is a good place to start. There might be really obvious signs that a classmate is struggling. Maybe they're really tired at school. Maybe they're coming to school in the same clothes day after day, but there may not be those obvious signs. I think good active listening skills go a long way. Something we hear from youth who have this lived experience with homelessness, all the time, is that they really want their voice to be heard. And they want their experiences to be heard and validated. And so, I think helping teenagers understand that they don't have to have all the solutions, if they can just be that listening ear, that can be really helpful, and maybe help their friends or classmates, open up about what they're experiencing. I think teenagers, once you get into that age range, you're in a position where you can empower yourself by learning about resources that are in the community. And again, just like making yourself empowered to provide concrete resource connections to folks who need that assistance. Obviously at school, hopefully there's trusted teachers, school counselors, things like that, who could maybe help facilitate some of that resource connection. But teenagers are in that position, like Carrie said, like they can be helpers, like they can jump in and assume that helping role, which is really cool. I want to bring this back to something kind of that Carrie touched on as well, is in that what we hear, from youth who are saying, I want my voice to be heard, is also like, I don't want someone to assume something about me or what I need. So I think that asking folks, are you okay? What's going on? Asking and truly listening is really important, particularly for this age group. I think when we start to assume that we know what's going on with someone's situation, or we assume that we know what they need to resolve it, that's when, particularly with teenagers, I think we see folks shut down and get frustrated. And so just that willingness to really actively listen and hear what that person actually believes that they need is really important. And I think that teenagers are in a really unique place to be that for each other in a way that sometimes just being an adult can be a barrier to actually being able to make those connections. And so I think, it's great that teenagers can kind of have each other for that active listening and relationship building kind of aspect in that solution.
I would just add, to make sure that all of your kids, if they're old enough to have a phone, they should know about 211. 211 is the 911 of community resources, and it's a great place to start if you're not sure what's available to help with a certain problem. They have wonderful counselors that can point them in the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those tools that, again, is going to reshape the way that we approach our own thought processes so that we can shape it for our kids, because it starts with us. we have to kind of put our own self scripts in check before we're able to efficiently communicate that to our kids. And listening is a big part of that. Sometimes you want to be the one with all the answers, and that's not always completely possible. So thank you both for those tips. I'd love to continue talking. I think we could talk for another hour about this, but we do need to conclude. And I'd just love to ask and give you both a moment to leave our listeners with maybe one big thought. If there's nothing else you take away from listening to all the wisdom shared today, all the tips shared today, what would you like that to be that they remember? And either of you, if you feel called to start.
I can start. Yeah, I think, again, my main goal with my own kiddos is just those open and honest conversations. I want to raise empathetic humans. And so I think that starts with just being willing to have those tough conversations, and being comfortable saying that I don't have all the answers. I think, again, it's really important to help kiddos understand that homelessness is an injustice. It's not right. And I think helping kiddos process how they feel about injustice in general, and then particularly homelessness, right? Again, like, this makes me feel sad. It's okay if this makes you feel sad. But then, like, where do we go from there, right? So like, using that as a segue to other conversations. Carrie mentioned some really good calls to action, bus passes, getting involved with local nonprofits, whatever that call to action is for your family. But I think that using it as that springboard into, this isn't right. This makes us sad. What are we going to do about it? Beyond just having those conversations and figuring out what that looks like for your family.
I agree, Megan. Along the same lines, I think it's important that we share our feelings as parents when there's an issue like homelessness that just seems insurmountable, that just seems so big, to say, I know it's really frustrating to me that we have this problem, and it makes me feel sad, and I want to do more, and this is the ways that I'm trying to do more. And I know that I can't do everything myself, but I can be a part of the solution. And that we're going to have to work together, and we're going to have to listen to each other, and just be honest about my feelings, that is complicated. And I like you said, Megan, I don't have all the answers, but we're going to try and figure out how to help together as a family. My daughter always calls us the family team. So as a family team, we're going to figure out what we can do to help, because it's not fair. It's not right. And it makes us feel yucky, and we want to do something to help. And I just try to be as transparent as I can about how complicated it is. But it helps that I honestly do have hope. I really do think that we have the resources as a country to address homelessness in a really meaningful way. Like, it wouldn't be our mission if we didn't think it was possible. We can end homelessness. I believe that. I don't have all the answers, but it can be done. And I try to bring that hopefulness to our conversations. Like, it's okay to feel sad and frustrated, but we have hope, and we're going to work towards it.
Thank you both so much for inspiring our own family teams. As your daughter says, Carrie, this has just been so valuable to me. I know so many of our listeners are going to be listening to this on repeat when they need some resources as well. So I so appreciate your time. I know I speak for our whole team when we say thank you so much to both of you for your servant leadership, for your advocacy for the less fortunate in our community. You're very inspiring. And if any of our listeners are inspired to help or interested in learning more about the Homeless Alliance, please visit www.homelessalliance.org. Thank you so much for listening, and join us next time on Raising OKC Kids.